Ted Bundy was one of the most infamous and chilling serial killers in American history. Born in 1946, Bundy used his charm, good looks, and intelligence to lure unsuspecting women to their deaths. Operating primarily in the 1990s, he confessed to murdering 30 women across several states, though the actual number is believed to be much higher. His method was calculated and deceitful, often feigning injury to gain his victims' trust before overpowering them. Bundy's crimes were marked by brutality, as he often assaulted his victims before and after their deaths. His daring escape from custody twice added to his notoriety, enabling him to continue his killing spree. Despite mounting evidence, Bundy maintained his innocence until shortly before his execution in 1989. His trial, televised nationwide, captivated the public and showcased his manipulative nature, as he even acted as his own attorney. Ted Bundy remains a haunting reminder of the danger that can lurk behind a facade of normalcy. Jeffrey Dahmer, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, is one of history's most chilling serial killers. Born in 1960, Dahmer's crimes shocked the world with their gruesome details. Between 1978 and 1991, he murdered 17 young men and boys, targeting individuals he lured to his home under the guise of friendship or intimacy. Dahmer's acts went beyond murder. He committed necrophilia, dismemberment, and even cannibalism, preserving parts of his victims as trophies. His fascination with control and dominance led him to experiment with drilling holes into victims' skulls in an attempt to create zombies. His capture in 1991 exposed the horrors hidden within his apartment, including human remains and photographic evidence of his crimes. Despite confessing in graphic detail, Dahmer expressed remorse, but his heinous acts left an indelible scar on the victims' families and society. Sentenced to life in prison, Dahmer was killed by a fellow inmate in 1994, marking a brutal end to one of the most horrifying chapters in criminal history. John Wayne Gacy, infamously known as the Killer Clown, was one of America's most disturbing serial killers. Born in 1942, Gacy outwardly appeared to be a successful businessman and community figure, even performing as Pogo the Clown at local events. Behind this facade, however, lurked a predator responsible for the sexual assault and murder of at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978. Gacy lured his victims with promises of work or friendship, often handcuffing them under the guise of a magic trick before subjecting them to horrific abuse and murder. He buried most of his victims in the crawl space of his Chicago home, a detail that shocked the world upon discovery. Arrested in 1978, Gacy was convicted and sentenced to death in 1980. While awaiting execution, he disturbingly turned to painting, with many of his works featuring his clown persona. Executed by lethal injection in 1994, Gacy's case remains a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind a mask of normalcy and charm. Ed Gein, the inspiration behind horror icons like Norman Bates and Leatherface, remains one of history's most macabre figures. Born in 1906 in Wisconsin, Gein lived a reclusive life dominated by his overbearing, religious mother. After her death, his mental state deteriorated, leading to crimes that horrified the nation. Gein was not a typical serial killer, as he was only convicted of 2 murders. However, his penchant for exhuming corpses from local graves and fashioning items from human remains cemented his infamy. Among the grisly discoveries in his home were lampshades, furniture, and clothing made from skin, as well as skulls turned into bowls. Arrested in 1957, Gein was declared insane and spent the rest of his life in a mental institution. He died in 1984, but his twisted legacy endures in pop culture. Gein's crimes exposed a haunting reality. Sometimes the line between fiction and real-life horror is terrifyingly thin. Aileen Wuornos, often referred to as the Damsel of Death, is one of history's most infamous female serial killers. Born in 1956, she endured a troubled childhood marked by abuse, abandonment, and hardship, which set the stage for her later crimes. Between 1989 and 1980, Wuornos murdered 7 men in Florida. Working as a prostitute, she claimed the killings were in self-defense, stating that the victims had assaulted or attempted to assault her. However, evidence revealed a darker pattern, with many of her victims shot at close range and robbed. Wuornos was arrested in 1991, largely due to the testimony of her lover, Teria Moore, whom investigators convinced to cooperate. Her trial and eventual death sentence drew widespread media attention, portraying her as both a victim of her circumstances and a cold-blooded killer. Executed in 2002, Wuornos remains a controversial figure, a tragic product of her environment, and a chilling reminder of how trauma and desperation can spiral into violence. Richard Ramirez, infamously known as the Night Stalker, terrorized California in the mid-1980s with a spree of horrifying crimes. Born in 1960, Ramirez's early life was marred by exposure to violence and satanic influences, shaping the brutal predator he would become. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez committed a series of home invasions, rapes, and murders, targeting victims randomly regardless of age or gender. His crimes were marked by extreme violence, often leaving satanic symbols at the scenes, which added to public panic. Ramirez's reign of terror ended in 1985 when he was recognized by citizens and apprehended after a mob subdued him in Los Angeles. During his trial, his lack of remorse and chilling court statements such as "Hail Satan" made headlines. Convicted of 13 murders and sentenced to death, Ramirez spent the rest of his life on death row, dying of cancer in 2013. The Night Stalker's crimes epitomize sheer brutality, cementing his place as one of history's most notorious serial killers. Andrei Chikatilo, infamously known as the Butcher of Rostov, was one of the Soviet Union's most prolific and horrifying serial killers. Born in 1936 in Ukraine during a time of famine and political upheaval, Chikatilo's early life was shaped by poverty, bullying, and a dysfunctional family. Between 1978 and 1990, Chikatilo brutally murdered 52 women and children across Russia. His crimes were marked by unspeakable savagery, including stabbing, mutilation, and cannibalism. He lured his victims by exploiting their trust, often approaching them at train stations or bus stops. Despite early arrests and wrongful convictions of others, Chikatilo evaded capture for years due to police inefficiency and a lack of awareness about serial killers in the USSR. He was finally caught in 1990 after suspicious behavior near a crime scene led to his arrest. At his trial, Chikatilo showed no remorse, and his chilling testimony shocked the world. Convicted of 52 murders, he was executed in 1994. His case remains one of the most infamous examples of unchecked evil in modern history. Holmes, often considered America's first serial killer, is infamous for his elaborate and sinister crimes during the late 19th century. Born in 1861, Herman Webster Mudgett, later known as Holmes, was a cunning and manipulative man who exploited his charm and intelligence to orchestrate a series of gruesome murders. Holmes lured victims to his specially designed murder castle in Chicago during the 1893 World's Fair. The building was a maze of secret rooms, trapdoors, and soundproof chambers where Holmes would torture, kill, and sometimes dissect his victims. He is believed to have murdered at least 27 people, though the actual number may be higher. Holmes's method of deceit was brilliant. He posed as a trustworthy businessman, making it easy for him to find vulnerable individuals. His crimes were finally uncovered in 1894 when he was arrested for insurance fraud. At his trial, he was convicted of 1 murder and sentenced to death. Executed in 1896, Holmes's case remains a chilling example of how deception, manipulation, and a lack of moral conscience can lead to horrific acts of violence. Albert Fish, known as the Gray Man or the Brooklyn Vampire, was one of America's most grotesque serial killers. Born in 1870, Fish was a sadistic, cannibalistic murderer who preyed on children, committing his crimes in the early 20th century. His depravity went far beyond mere murder as he indulged in acts of torture, mutilation, and cannibalism. Fish's crimes began in the 1920s, with his most notorious act being the abduction, murder, and consumption of a young girl named Grace Budd in 1928. Fish sent a chilling letter to the girl's parents describing the details of her death and his cannibalistic acts. This letter led to his eventual capture in 1934, after which he confessed to killing and eating several children, though the full extent of his crimes remains unknown. Fish's trial in 1935 revealed the extent of his insanity, as he claimed to be driven by a divine mandate to kill and consume children. He was convicted of murder and executed by electric chair in 1936. His case remains one of the most harrowing examples of human monstrosity, leaving a legacy of fear and horror. Pedro López, known as the Monster of the Andes, is one of South America's most notorious serial killers. Born in 1948 in Colombia, López was responsible for the murders of at least 110 girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru during the 1970s and 1980s. Some estimates suggest the actual number may be much higher, with some reports claiming he may have killed as many as 300 victims. López's victims were typically young girls whom he abducted, raped, and strangled. His modus operandi was disturbingly methodical. He would often lure the girls with promises of work or safety before taking them to secluded areas where he would carry out his grisly crimes. After his capture in 1980, López confessed to the murders in a chillingly detached manner, detailing how he would bury his victims in shallow graves. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison in Ecuador, but was released in 1994 due to his good behavior. His current whereabouts are unknown, and his case remains a haunting mystery, reflecting the terrifying reality of serial killers operating across borders. Jack the Ripper remains one of the most infamous and mysterious serial killers in history. Active in the late 1880s in London, specifically in the Whitechapel district, the identity of this killer has never been conclusively discovered, adding to the chilling allure of his crimes. Between 1888 and 1889, Jack the Ripper brutally murdered at least 5 women, all of whom were prostitutes. His signature style involved slashing the throats of his victims before mutilating their bodies, including organs being removed, which suggested a level of anatomical knowledge. The gruesome nature of these killings shocked London and sparked widespread panic. What set Jack the Ripper apart from other serial killers was not just his brutal methods, but also his ability to evade capture. Despite extensive investigations, including letters that purported to come from the killer, his true identity remains unknown. Numerous theories have emerged over the years, with suspects ranging from a member of the royal family to local physicians. The Ripper's case endures as one of history's most haunting unsolved mysteries, and his legacy continues to fascinate and terrify to this day. Dennis Rader, infamously known as the BTK Killer, terrorized the Wichita, Kansas area for over 3 decades. Born in 1945, Rader led a seemingly ordinary life as a family man, a compliance officer, and a member of his local church. However, behind this facade, he harbored a dark and twisted urge to kill. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader committed at least 10 murders, earning his nickname BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. The method he used to torture and murder his victims. His killings were methodical and sadistic, often involving tying up his victims, torturing them, and then strangling them. He would then send taunting letters to the police and media, detailing his crimes in disturbing detail. For over 30 years, Rader evaded capture, with the case growing cold as he seemingly disappeared. However, in 2004, he resurfaced, sending more letters to authorities. His eventual capture came in 2005 after DNA evidence linked him to the murders. Rader was convicted and sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison. Rader's ability to blend into society while harboring such depravity serves as a chilling reminder of the danger that can lie behind a mask of normalcy. Charles Ng and Leonard Lake were a pair of chilling serial killers whose crimes shocked the nation in the 1980s. Operating in Northern California, the duo is believed to have committed at least 11 murders, though the actual number may be higher. Lake, a former military man, and Ng, a fugitive, lured victims into their isolated cabin, where they subjected them to horrific torture. They would often imprison women, videotape their torment, and sometimes force them into sexual slavery before killing them. Their twisted killing spree ended when Lake died by suicide while in custody, leaving Ng to face justice alone. Ng was arrested in 1985 after a string of violent crimes led to a manhunt. Once captured, authorities discovered disturbing evidence, including videotapes of the murders and a hidden bunker containing the remains of the victims. Ng was convicted of several murders and sentenced to death. Though he remains on death row in California, the horrifying nature of their crimes and the sadistic partnership between Ng and Lake make them one of the most terrifying duos in the history of serial killers. Elizabeth Báthory, often dubbed the Blood Countess, is one of history's most infamous female serial killers. Born in 1560 into a powerful Hungarian family, she became known for her sadistic crimes that were steeped in rumors and terror. Báthory's gruesome acts allegedly began in the early 1600s, where she was accused of torturing and murdering young women, believing that bathing in their blood would preserve her youth and beauty. Over the years, the number of her victims grew, with some reports suggesting that as many as 650 girls were murdered, though the exact number remains uncertain. Her wealth and noble status allowed her to act with impunity for a time, but eventually her crimes were discovered. In 1610, after an investigation revealed the horrific nature of her actions, Báthory was arrested and placed under house arrest, where she died in 1614. Though many of the allegations against her have been questioned over the centuries, some suggesting political motives behind the charges, Elizabeth Báthory's legend has endured as one of the most terrifying figures in history, embodying both the fear and fascination with power, cruelty, and the supernatural. Harold Shipman, a British doctor, is one of the most prolific serial killers in history, responsible for the deaths of at least 250 patients over a period of 23 years. Born in 1946, Shipman seemed to be an upstanding member of society, practicing medicine in rural England. However, behind his trusted position in the community, he was systematically murdering his patients, primarily elderly women, by administering lethal doses of painkillers. Shipman's modus operandi was disturbingly methodical. He would often inject his victims with heroin, causing their deaths to appear natural. His position as a trusted doctor allowed him to gain access to his victims without suspicion, and many of his killings went unnoticed for years. In 1998, a concerned family member grew suspicious of Shipman's practices, leading to an investigation. The inquiry revealed an alarming pattern of unexplained deaths, eventually leading to Shipman's arrest in 1998. In 2000, he was convicted of 15 murders, though it is believed that the actual number may have been much higher. Shipman committed suicide in 2004 while serving his life sentence, leaving behind a chilling legacy as one of the most insidious serial killers in history.